Mac guys here with you on Birds 365. Thanks for jumping aboard. We must thank for jumping aboard our first guest of the day, the venerable columnist here in town, top columnist as far as I'm concerned. He's been doing it for a while. Mike Sielski, who covers all things Philadelphia sports for the Philadelphia Inquirer, hops on board with us. How are you this morning, Mike?
Doing great, Jody. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, Mike, we wanted to have you on. Great piece on Zach Ertz, and obviously it is June 1st. Here we are, big date in the NFL. I think people make a little bit too much of it, but Zach Ertz is still here. We've been talking about this for weeks and weeks and weeks. Howie Roseman's playing a game of chicken value, and interestingly, your column brought out the value and the value of a player like Zach Ertz that he might have. And it all harkens back, as it always does in this league, to Bill Belichick.
Yeah, it sure does. First of all, thank you for having me on too, John. I always appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think people forget that, right? Like Philadelphia can be so parochial and so provincial about its athletes and its teams that sometimes we forget to kind of take a step back and look at an athlete's context, right? And in the context of the NFL, Zach Ertz is part of a really important trend that Bill Belichick started back in, 2010, when he drafted Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez and said, you know what? I don't want just one pretty good receiving tight end. I want two great ones. And I'm going to put them on the field at the same time. And I'm going to force defenses to make a choice. Do I cover these guys with a slow linebacker or a small defensive back? And what happened? A new trend formed around the league. You started seeing teams draft players like Travis Kelce, players like that. You know, the Eagles draft Zach Ertz in 2013 as part of that trend. He becomes an all-time player for them, catches the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. And then we have the draft this year, and you've got the player who kind of everybody assumes kind of embodies that sort of archetype, who's Kyle Pitts out of Florida, who, you know, it's amazing to me. I've never seen a player evaluated like Pitts, where people are ranking him as a top 5 player in the league at his position before he's played a single snap.
And I would be guilty as charged there. I think he's going to kind of reestablish what the tight end position is in the National Football League. Let's get you involved in the debate would be the best way to describe it John and I were having as to how can Zach Ertz best get out of town. If he wants to get out of town, which I think he's made pretty darn apparent, I think he's going to have to be an active participant. I don't think he can just sit and say, listen, I don't want to be here, Eagles. Trade me, get me out of here, or release me. I think he's got to work with his new team in negotiating a deal ahead of time to readjust his salary, because he's going to cost his new team $8 million on the cap as of right now. Travis Kelce only costs Kansas City 7 and change. Kittle only costs San Francisco 5 and change. I don't think there's a team in the league that wants to take on our guy, Ertz, with his salary at 8 and change. I think there's got to be a negotiation done ahead of time. Yay or nay?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, you know, listening to what you guys were discussing, I mean, it's kind of both sides of the same coin, right? I mean, what Howie Roseman's going to do is he's going to wait until he gets the best possible offer he thinks he can get, and he's going to dare Zach Ertz and Steve Carrick to take a step back and say, okay, it's not happening. We are the ones who are going to have to change our situation if we want to change our situation, right? So, you know, it depends on how long Zach thinks he can wait before he says, you know what, okay, the writing's on the wall. I'm not going to get moved for, you know, the money I'm making now, for the cap number I'm at now. And so I'm going to have to change this situation by renegotiating or doing whatever. I think, you know, the presumption has been that Ertz was finished in Philadelphia has been hanging over this for so long that some of this is just, hey, why hasn't this happened already? Like, we could all see the writing on the wall so early on that it's just kind of taken for granted that this was going to happen. Well, yeah, it's going to happen, but it wasn't going to happen yesterday, and it might not happen today, and it might not happen for another 3 or 4 months. So, you know, I think everybody has gotten caught up in the timeline as opposed to the eventuality of what's going to take place.
Now, I want to talk, Mike, about, and you brought it up, and you brought up the Super Bowl, and obviously I think that is the height of Zach Ertz's career, and everybody talks about the touchdown. Frank Wright told me right after the game the most important play in that game, which you also had in the column, was the 4th and 1, and sort of how Zach Ertz slid, gave Nick Foles that little bit of extra time and uncleared, coaches talk about personalities of game. Jim Schwartz said it was a shootout, obviously. Frank Reich said, we're not winning that game if we don't convert that 4th and 1. Flat out said it to me. That's how they felt. Now, you don't know if that's going to happen. Maybe the Eagles come out, Brandon Graham does something, whatever. But just his imprint on this organization. This is an all-time great player. Is it not? This is a Ring of Honor guy. This is an Eagles Hall of Fame guy.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, John. And I think you're right. I think, statistically, the more important play is the game-winning touchdown, right? And the touchdown stands out because of the circumstances, because of, I think, in part, Chris Collinsworth's call, if you were watching the game at home, where he says, look out, Zach Ertz lined up wide, and boom, Foles knows exactly to go to Ertz, throws a perfect ball, hits him in stride, and Ertz scores a touchdown on a play, mind you, in which he is lined up against a cornerback, Devin McCourty, who he's much bigger than and doesn't outmuscle him. He just outraces him to the spot on the field to get to that pass. But you're right about the 4th down play. That is the most important offensive play in the game for the Eagles. For all the reasons you described, the timing of Foles sliding and Ertz sliding to get open at the same time. Ertz takes a hit as soon as he catches the ball. It would have been very easy for that ball to pop right out of his hands as soon as he took that hit, and he didn't. And he got just enough for the 1st down, and the drive keeps going, and we all know what happens after that. But yeah, look at the numbers that Zach Ertz put up. Look how essential he was to the Eagles offense for as long as he was. I mean, people forget he had that great Super Bowl. He comes back the following year and has the best receiving season of any Eagles player ever in terms of number of catches, in terms of the importance of his catches. Go back to that 3-game winning streak at the end of the season that got the Eagles into the playoffs that year. He had a tremendous game against the Houston Texans. A big game against the Washington football team in the last game of the season. You're right, John. He's an all-time Eagle, and the complaints you hear from people about Zach Ertz, to me, are the kind of complaints that you hear from people who are looking to find fault with a guy during his career, right? It's like, oh, he didn't throw that block in Cincinnati in 2016, or he should come back now and play for his contract. Like, get over it, guys. Like, these are the most trite, ridiculous complaints. The guy is an Eagles Hall of Famer, and just accept the fact that he was a great player here for a long time.
All right, then guilty as charged. I'm going to throw a question or two out there. I'll say, sorry, Keith Jackson fans. He's the greatest tight end statistically ever in the history of the Eagles. But you're right. 2017, the Super Bowl, the zenith of his career. 2018, statistically, the best tight end season that any Eagles ever had. 2019, he came back to the pack. I'll get to 2020, which there are a lot of explanations for, injuries to the player being the biggest reason, but there are others, Eagles and quarterback related and play calling and everything else. But 2019 surely wasn't 2018 either. And the thing that I remember most about 2019 and Zach Ertz is coming up just short of first downs. When they needed 6 on 3rd down, he got 5.5. When they needed 8, he got 7.5. When they needed 3, he got 2.5. He just never seemed to be able. And that, again, is something that you blame on both the quarterback, the play calling, and the individual player. He wasn't near as clutch as he was in 2019. Follow that up with what he did last year, which was a major drop-off. Is Father Time getting the better of Zach Ertz? Is that a big reason why he's going to become an ex-Eagle? Because the Eagles actually reading the situation right, that Zach Ertz ain't what he used to be.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the key question we're all talking about here, Jody, right? Like, that's the calculation that the Eagles are making. And it's not the calculation that Ertz and Steve Carrick are making, because their argument is he's going to have a lot of football left in him. And the Eagles are basically saying, we can't use him, not at that cap number because he doesn't have a lot of football left. To your point, some of the 2019 thing I would say is nitpicking a little bit, but I would also say that I think this is the key. Like, this comes down to not just a question about Zach Ertz, but also Carson Wentz, right? Like, as good as Wentz could be in 2019, particularly at the end of that season, he was fairly inconsistent as well. And, I was higher on him back then than a lot of people are. Certainly in 2020, a different story. He was terrible. But, you can, to me, you can never quite separate the receiver performance from a quarterback performance. And as great as Wentz was in the final 4 weeks of that season, he wasn't as great early on. And, I would imagine that had something to do with, Zach Ertz gaining 5 yards on 3rd and 6. And just to bring it back to the Ertz argument, go back and look at the NFC Championship game against the Vikings. He makes a number of key 3rd down catches where, they need 2 yards and he gets 5 or 6, or fights for 1st down yardage and things like that. So, look, you're right. It's the core question of this whole offseason as far as the Eagles and Ertz are concerned. How much more does he have left in the tank? And that's why we're in this holding pattern, is because Ertz is convinced he has more. The Eagles are convinced he doesn't. They got to convince another team that he does.
Now, Mike, when we talk about how Zach is viewed, and I do want to say I think it's a minority. I think most Eagles fans view him as a great player. I think it has to do, my personal opinion, I think it has to do with style. He's not Rob Gronkowski. He's not an old school Mark Bavaro type tight end who's going to knock people on their what. He's a flex receiver. But the game has changed. And you brought that up beautifully with the Aaron Hernandezes of the world, the Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce isn't blocking anybody. Kyle Pitts isn't blocking anybody when he gets in this league, at least the way Gronk does, the way old school tight ends do. When we talk about Zach Ertz's toughness, though, I go back to the playoffs against Seattle. And I think this is where this disconnect started. He played in that game with a lacerated kidney and a broken rib. And that's pretty tough. I mean, he is a tough guy. So to me, it comes down to style and what Philadelphia thinks of itself as a city. You think that's fair?
I think that's 100% right, John. I think if Zach Ertz, let me put it this way. If Brent Selleck, with the style of play that he had, put up the kind of numbers that Zach Ertz did, they'd be building statues of Brent Selleck in this town. And Selleck was an excellent player and an excellent leader for a long time. But he was not the receiving tight end that Zach Ertz was, for the very reason that you cited, John, that the game changed. Yeah, Philadelphia has that cliched blue-collar thinking that, you do win games with smash-mouth defense, and your tight end better block, and when he catches the ball, he better create instant urban renewal, running through the defense to get to the end zone. And that wasn't Ertz. Ertz, could beat a cornerback on a deep route, right? If you covered him, I always go back, I mentioned the NFC Championship game. One of the standout plays in that game to me is late in the first half.
So Harrison Smith play?
Harrison Smith play. The Minnesota Vikings totally screw that play up and have Ertz covered by Harrison Smith, the safety. And Ertz makes a double move and ends up, there isn't a Vikings player within 15 yards of him. And that leads to a Jake Elliott field goal. It's 24-7 at halftime, and the Vikings are dead after that play. That play, as in that game, killed the Vikings. And that's who Zach Ertz was. And so, I think to your point, John, a lot of the criticism, such as it was, of Ertz during his time in Philadelphia is stylistic. But as I pointed out in the column, that was the way the NFL was trending at that time. I talked to Mark Dominic, the former Buccaneers general manager. He's like, you don't want a guy like Zach Ertz staying in the block. You're wasting what he can do. I think, again, my feeling is Ertz, and your point about his toughness with the lacerated kidney and the broken rib is right on the money. I talked to him after that game. And what was interesting to me was he went out of his way to kind of defend Carson Wentz, who left that game, you remember, with the concussion because of the cheap shot by Jadeveon Clowney. He went out of his way to say, look, the head is a totally different thing. I'm playing with what I'm playing with, but, a guy gets hit in the head, and Ertz had concussions too throughout his career. That's a different ballgame.
All right, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
No, you're not allowed, Joe.
Yes, no, I'm going to do it. Get ready for it.
Cody's angry this morning.
What's the hashtag? Come at me, bro.
Yeah.
I believe that Zach Ertz will not be an Eagle when we get to opening day, but that's not the question I want to ask. If that is going to be the case, have they left the cupboard too bare here? The new NFL, where you need to have 12 position players to be able to get out there and create mismatches and the like. So many teams going to 2 tight end looks. Well, the two tight end look right now would be Dallas Goedert and who? Who's going to be that other Eagle tight end if his name isn't Zach Ertz? What major tight end move have the Eagles made? Shoot, Richard Rodgers was the next best one, and they haven't even put him back on the roster yet. Where are they headed with this if Zach Ertz is headed out of town?
Well, don't you think they're headed to flooding secondaries with wide receivers now between Devontae Smith and, Jalen Reagor and whoever else? I mean, look, Greg Ward might average 5 yards a catch, but Greg Ward, can get open a little bit in the NFL. I think that's the way they're looking at this, right? And I think we have to remember what this season is going to be for the Eagles. It is, we can look at the terribleness of the NFC East as much as we want. The Eagles are still not a Super Bowl contender. And at its core, this is still a find out what you got kind of season for them. All proclamations of optimism to the contrary. I listen to certain talk radio stations like you guys do, and the idea that we're going to push this narrative that the Eagles should be competing for a division championship, to me, that strikes me as wishful thinking, given the amount of changes they made and the roster the way it looks. So, it's on Nick Sirianni to figure out, okay, is there another tight end that we can use in a different kind of way? Or are we going to de-emphasize the position that Goedert is a bigger, more physical player at the line of scrimmage than Zach Ertz was? So if we have that, how do we use the other quote unquote weapons we have, to create open looks for Jalen Hurts?
Now, Mike, you bring up something interesting there. We've been in this stasis for a couple years post Super Bowl. Howie Roseman comes out after the season, says we got to get younger, we got to get more cost effective. Then the offseason goes on. The Eagles start saying, yeah, you know what? This is a bad division. We're a little bit better than people think we are. At least that's the thought process inside the NovaCare complex. And they start making decisions about. Now, I have no issue with the Ryan Kerrigan signing because they got him at a very cost-effective low number. But they're talking about Julio Jones. They're talking about Julio Jones in that building. Now, they're not going to get him, but just the fact that they're saying 32-year-old future Hall of Fame receiver, maybe we're a little bit better. Are they falling down that same rabbit hole again?
I think they might be, John, and to a certain degree, I can't blame them. Right, okay? For here's the reason. I was one of their biggest critics back in 2016 because I felt like they were trying to have it both ways. They were trying to rebuild and stay competitive at the same time. And I thought, it's the old line from the Karate Kid, right? That Mr. Miyagi says, you're going to do karate or you're not going to do karate. You can't walk that line because you'll get squished by a grape. And it worked out for them a year later, right? They signed these veteran guys like Rodney McLeod and Brandon Brooks, and they waited to trade Sam Bradford, and they traded him. That things broke right, and they were able to trade him for a first-round pick. And Wentz was able to come in and play pretty well right away, and boom, a year later they're winning a Super Bowl. And I'm generally of the mindset the NFL isn't a league where you have to necessarily break it all down and build it back up again over a long period of time. And even if you try to do that, you might be able to turn things around relatively quickly. My issue with what they're doing now is, given where they're at, they're not going to turn themselves into a Super Bowl contender in a year's time. And the winning the division thing, winning the NFC East, to me, is just fool's gold, right? You're doing that because you want to get a playoff game, and you want to be able to say you got to the playoffs by going 8-9 in a terrible division. And I can't believe I just said 8-9 for an NFL season. I really got to get used to that.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? Like they swung for the fences with Wentz, and they connected for a short while, and they were able to parlay that into a Super Bowl. They're not doing that now. So the idea that you're going to, try to walk that line again and kind of rebuild, but kind of win the division, I don't think the benefits of the going for it, so to speak, are as great as they were 5 years ago.
Mike, something I was going to bring up with John a little later in the show. We can do it now so I can get your opinion on it. We don't know about Nick Sirianni here in Philadelphia just yet. We could judge what he did last year in Indianapolis in conjunction with Frank Wright and draw some conclusions over setups and play calling and systems and the like. They weren't afraid to run the ball in Indianapolis. I wouldn't say they were a run-heavy team, but they weren't a off-the-charts run-pass ratio, rolling your eyes type, got to throw it on every single down that from time to time we'd see here in Philadelphia. Andy Reid directly into Doug Peterson. We know Miles Sanders is going to be the number one guy carrying the football for the Eagles when they run it this year. Who's going to be that number two?
Good question. I think Boston Scott showed enough that you can give him the ball here and there. He can be fairly productive. We'll see what some of the rookies do. But I think I would take issue a little bit with your point about Sirianni running the ball in Indianapolis. Nick Sirianni and Frank Reich weren't working for Jeffrey Lurie in Indianapolis. Jeffrey Lurie likes to throw the ball. It's just the way, that's what he believes in. It's funny that I was looking back at some old columns I'd written during the course of the 2020 season. And after the first game of the season, that loss at Washington, where the Eagles had the 17-point lead and then it all went to pot really quickly, I wrote a column criticizing Doug Peterson because he didn't take his foot off the gas pedal, right? Like, that's a game where once you're up 17-0 on Washington and Dwayne Haskins is the quarterback and there's no fans in the stands, run the ball 3 times every single time you get it on offense, and you'll win the game 17-3, and everything will be hunky-dory. And the only way that you can lose that game is by having a quarterback, spray the ball all over the field and throw a couple picks and give the other team momentum. And I criticized Peterson for that. And that's fine as far as I went. But what I should have done is criticized the Eagles' way of thinking, because that's what Peterson was following. That's what Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman want. They want points. We're talking about an owner who, according to my colleague Jeff McClain, after the Eagles beat the Bears in the playoffs in 2019, won a road playoff game in an upset with a terrific defensive performance, was dismayed because the game wasn't exciting enough. The team didn't score enough points. That's who the owner is. And so we can talk about Miles Sanders and Boston Scott and rookie running backs all we want. They're going to want Jalen Hurts to throw the ball, and they're going to want Nick Sirianni to be creative in his passing attack. That's just the way they are.
Yeah, and when the Eagles upset Green Bay, and Green Bay, same thing.
Exactly, John.
Same thing. And the interesting thing about Jeffrey Lurie, Mike, is you go to the Super Bowl, we'll go to the Super Bowl. He was angry at Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz was in a bad mood for a reason. He wasn't happy after he won the Super Bowl because they didn't do it the right way.
Style points seem to matter. Style points seem to matter. And I wonder about that with Jeffrey sometimes. Like, does he appreciate how hard this is to do? You would think he would. I mean, he's owned the team for more than a quarter century and won only one championship. You would think he would understand, like, dude, if you won, be happy that you won. But,
it is a brilliant point, and it explains a lot of things when it comes to Doug Peterson and throwing the football. And, the NFL's, by the way, I think, as a base assessment, I think Jeffrey Lurie is right about the NFL. But at the end of the day, it's about how do you get to that finish line. You should be happy. And if Miles Sanders gets 150 rushing yards and you win a game where Jalen Hurts is 15 out of 20, Nick Sirianni's going to hear about it.
It's funny, John, to bring it to take it out of the realm of the Eagles. I feel like this is a discussion we're having in sports all the time now, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball. Like, how do you balance the short-term success and what a team needs to do to win a particular game or a particular set of games versus what they do over the long term, right? It's the Ben Simmons discussion in the NFL. What's more important to the Sixers? Is it that Ben Simmons makes those free throws in the final 2 minutes? Are they ever going to be able to win a championship if an opposing team knows that they can just foul him in the last 2 minutes of the game? Or do you accentuate the positive with Ben Simmons and say he's a great defensive player, he moves the ball around the perimeter, he can lead a fast break, he's 6'10", and can do all these things? That's the debate that's taking place throughout sports, and the Eagles embody that as much as anybody. Do we want to throw the ball all the time to the point that it's going to cost us a game and several games maybe, but particularly like one against Washington? Or are we going to accent more than just in certain situations, you got to win the game the way you got to win a game? And if it means Craig James breaking up an Aaron Rodgers pass at Lambeau Field be thankful you did it, and let's get on to next week.
My answer is you can do both. Those who say you can't do both are just flat out wrong. You can emphasize the positive, but certainly note when something isn't up to snuff, despite what Doc Rivers says. Let me get back to Jeff Lurie. We were talking about him and his outlook and the influence he has on the team. He's the guy who said this year is a transition year. That wasn't anybody else. That was the owner. He decided to go down that role and hole when he decided to remove Doug Peterson. They have changed. It's a brand new coaching staff. The way of thinking will change. They've made some big moves to the roster and the like. In this transition year, Mike Sielski, who will be the guy or what will be the aspect that we, and when I say we, I mean you, me, Johnny Mac, the media, and we, you, me, Johnny Mac, and the rest of Eagle Nation, who is going to be missed the most in this transition year? Who will be calling me on Sports Talk Radio going, you know what I missed, Jode? And they roll out a carpet for something that used to be the Eagle way. Who's that person or way of doing things going to be?
That's a really interesting question, Jody. I wonder if Doug Peterson might be that guy, because I think what's happening with Sirianni is the same thing that's happening with the Eagles writ large in the offseason. Is we're so distant from the season beginning and we're so distant from the season having ended that we're kind of extrapolating and assigning qualities to Sirianni that we don't know whether he has yet. You know, there's a great distance now from the opening press conference he gave, which was so bad and got people so worried. And we've moved on from that. You know, rock, paper, scissors is endearing now. You know, it could come a time in October where we're like, gosh, remember, you know, Doug Peterson, man, he could design an offense and he could get guys open for a while there. And what happened? You know, where did that go? Yeah. You know, I do think there's the potential to say, hey, remember when we had Carson Wentz in 2017? Remember that? I'm not suggesting that Jalen Hurts can't play. I don't know whether Jalen Hurts can play or not. I don't know. But I do think it's easy to forget how good Wentz was in 17 and for parts of 18 and 19. And so that's a possibility, right? That the lens always goes to the quarterback first and foremost. And yeah, 2020 is going to be fresh in people's minds. But if Jalen Hurts isn't coming out and setting the world on fire, there are going to be people going, hey, you know, maybe we made a mistake here. I don't know.
Mike, that's where I want to end it. Before I do, I want to thank you for joining the program. I also want to bring up your book, The Rise, Kobe Bryant, The Pursuit of Immortality. When is it coming out? Everybody should read it. Everybody should read Mike's columns. But so tell us about that. And also with Jalen Hurts, you know, I've said this with Deshaun Watson potentially out there. Who knows with Aaron Rodgers? Who knows with Russell Wilson? I ask a lot of people this. Is there anything Jalen Hurts can do for this team this season if one of those guys become available to stop the Eagles from going in that direction?
Yeah, he can have a terrific season. He can have a season, maybe not an all-pro kind of season, but he can show that he's a more than capable starting quarterback. And John, I would argue if he does that, the Eagles should not pursue Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson. I have come around to the idea that if teams are smart, and you have to look at this purely from a football winning standpoint, as opposed to if we have a star quarterback, we have more attention drawn to our team, we sell more merchandise. It's better for the franchise if we have a Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson kind of guy. Keeping a quarterback on a low-cost rookie contract and building around him might be the best way to go about building a championship team. It's what the Eagles did in 2017. It has allowed other teams without good quarterback situations to stay in the hunt and make the playoffs. I point you to the Washington football team last year, which basically had the three of us play quarterback for them and still made the playoffs because the rest of their roster was so good. So that would be my position there. I think you're probably right. There may not be anything that can stop the Eagles from going after one of those big name guys if one of them becomes available. But yeah, that would be my take on that. And thanks for mentioning the book, The Rise. It's coming out January 11th. It's a look at Kobe, the first half of his life. So his career and life at Lower Merion, his life in Italy a little bit, his leading Lower Merion to the state championship, kind of an underdog story, run up to the draft, is entering the NBA. His identity is a black teenager in a suburban Philly community. Kind of the elevator pitch I give for it is it's Batman Begins for the Black Mamba. And January 11th, go to Amazon now. You can pre-order.
That sounds outstanding. And by the way, I thought the three of us played quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys when Dak Prescott went down last year, but that's just my evaluation. Mr. Sielski, always a pleasure. Good to catch up, buddy. We'll be tapping into you again in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, pal. Thank
you, guys. I hope to see you on the trail soon.
You will.
Thanks, Mike.
Do just that. Mike Sielski here with us on Birds 365. All right, come back. I do want to get that question out for John. I asked Mike. I was thinking about the running game, and I appreciate Mike's way of looking at it. We are talking about the Eagles in a Jeff Lurie-owned organization.
It's a very good point. Very good point.
They're going to run the ball some. Now, how much is that going to be? Well, we'll see. And who is it going to be if it's not Miles Sanders? I want to get Johnny Mac's thoughts on that next here on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.